No matter what you do in life, you'll always benefit from having a plan, and this is true for fantasy football. Having a strategy for your draft is key, and I've drafted over 100 teams so far this summer. And this is the #1 strategy I'm using to win my leagues in 2023, and you should too. In rounds 1 and 2, lean value over upside. You want to seek out reliability. Now, to start your draft, it'll depend if you have one of those first 7 or 8 picks or not. If you have one of those first 7 or 8 picks, normally you'll get a Stephon Diggs, a Cooper Kupp to fall to you, or your first or second, just take a Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase. One of the wide receivers, those guys are looking like studs early on. However, if you're towards the middle to back end of the first round and those players are no longer there, you can target either a running back or receiver, and that would be either CeeDee Lamb or Saquon Barkley, who are typically there every single time. Now, in my most recent draft, utilizing this same #1 draft strategy on Underdog, I ended up with CeeDee Lamb with the 10th overall pick in the first round. Look, Lamb's a great option because he's just year in and year out since he entered the NFL. He's been productive. He can earn targets, 111, 120, then 156 last year, and he's reliable. He hasn't missed a game in his NFL career for injury. And Lamb is extremely efficient, last year ranking top 10 in his ability to earn targets per route run, and normally the more experience you have in the league, this continues to build. It's built in 3 straight years he's improved this, and now he heads into year 4. And the other thing is the competition just isn't there. Dalton Schultz is now gone, and so is Ezekiel Elliott, which opens up red zone opportunities for Lamb. And this is the one big piece to the puzzle for Lamb to potentially be a top 3 overall receiver in fantasy. If he can start to get more red zone targets, he was just 18th in this metric last year, but big red zone threats, like we said, Schultz and Zeke are now gone. So that's round 1. And now for round 2, here's the thing. There's no special formula to going wide receiver, running back, or running back, wide receiver in your home league. Now in best ball tournaments, yeah, 2 wide receivers is going to be more beneficial, but when you're playing just your buddies and your friends at home, that's not going to be the case. It really just comes down to taking the best available player here. And now typically if I took a wide receiver in the first round with this strategy, I look for a running back, and often you'll have guys like Josh Jacobs, Nick Chubb, or Tony Pollard. However, I was lucky enough in this draft actually to have Bijan Robinson, who normally goes as a top 10 pick. He actually fell to me in the second round with the 15th overall pick. If Bijan was not here, I would have taken Tony Pollard. And Bijan is a great option in round 2. He was taken with a top 10 overall pick by the Falcons. I don't love him in round 1, but round 2, there's value because he's entering the #3 overall efficiency offense in the NFL last year. Yeah, the Atlanta Falcons were #3 in efficiency. That's how good Arthur Smith is at creating an offense. And now you get Bijan Robinson dropped in, who's an athletic freak and averaged nearly 160 yards per game last year. If Arthur Smith can make Cordell Patterson and Tyler Algier look like superstars, I think he can make Bijan look just fine. And now here's a general tip to keep in mind for this strategy. Cue the players that you want before the draft begins and always have more than one option in mind for each round. All right, now we head to rounds 3 through 5, which are the rounds you want to look for some upside, because this is the average draft position where players were taken in 2022. And look at this name right here. The 48th overall player, so the end of the 4th round, beginning of the 5th round in 2022, was Josh Jacobs. And Jacobs ended up scoring the most fantasy points amongst any running back or wide receiver last year. So this is where you can find your league winners in round 3 to 5. Don't be afraid to hit on upside. And that starts with round 3, where you could do 2 things. First, you can look for a quarterback if they fall, like maybe a Jalen Hurts or a Joe Burrow falls into round 3 a little bit, or you can get your second wide receiver like a T. Higgins, you can see on the screen here, Devonta Smith, those types of players. So there's a few routes you can go here, and I had Lamar Jackson fall to me. He fell like 2 or 3 spots past average draft position, so I ended up scooping him up because it is extremely important to target mobile quarterbacks in fantasy football. They have the cheat codes, and you can see the cheat codes for Lamar Jackson, which speak for themselves. He was 2nd in rushing yards per game last year, and also he had 3 rushing touchdowns, a down year for him, but he has the ability we've seen in past years for the red zone rushing upside, which is a part of that cheat code for QBs. And we should expect that red zone usage to even increase this year now that he's entering the year healthy, because last year, well, he missed the final 6 games with a PCL sprain, and he wasn't used really for the second half of the year, dealing with injuries around the goal line. And heading into 2023, there's been major changes and upgrades in the offense. For starters, these will be the best weapons that Lamar has had in his career, with Rashad Bateman returning. They drafted Zay Flowers, and they signed Odell Beckham to real money. If we look at Rashad Bateman's efficiency last year before injury, 2.59 yards per route run. That was actually top 10 in the NFL. Then the Ravens drafted first rounder Zay Flowers out of Boston College, who accounted for nearly 47% of his team's college production. That's top 6% of all time. And of course, there's Mark Andrews there, J.K. Dobbins coming back healthy. Odell signed a major deal with this team to be a wide receiver 1. And they'll also have new pieces on the coaching staff on the offensive side of the ball. So instead of being 28th in run plays per game this year, they want to go more balanced around top 15, which means Lamar will have his rushing upside, of course, and now even more passing volume. So we get out of round 3 and we enter round 4. And according to the #1 draft strategy I found, no matter what, take a wide receiver here. You'll have options like Terry McLaurin, Christian Watson, and Drake London, but I would target Jerry Jeudy. Sometimes you might have to reach like 5 picks or so, but he is going to be worth it. He's coming off a of a career year where he was 16th in wide receiver efficiency, he was top 10 in yards per target, and he did all of this despite Russell Wilson struggling last year, and Jeudy finished the year strong. Because over his final 8 games, he averaged over 18 fantasy points on 7.9 targets per game. Now, another tip I want to point out, and a major mistake that I see before we head into round 5, don't fill your starting lineup first. You should aim to take the best available player at all times in your draft. Look, your starting lineup is going to change every single week as the year goes on, for injuries, bye weeks, or just other players performing well on your bench. So don't try and fill your lineup first. Now, in round 5, you want to target the best available wide receiver or running back according to the rankings or tiers that you're using. And some options here are going to be a Miles Sanders, a Cam Akers at those positions. Hey, maybe Jerry Jeudy fell to you. If you scroll a little bit more, you'll see Chris Godwin and Drake London falls sometimes as well. In round 5, I ended up getting sniped on a couple of players that I wanted, so I went and I got our third wide receiver, Chris Godwin. Look, Godwin still got it. Last year, he was top 15 at winning versus man coverage, and he was one of the best wide receivers at earning targets. Now, a lot of people are off of Godwin this year because his new quarterback, he goes from Brady to Baker Mayfield. However, Mayfield's slot wide receivers average almost 4 more fantasy points per game than his outside receivers. And last year, Chris Godwin had the 4th most slot snaps in the NFL, and he led every single wide receiver, actually tied with Christian Kirk, for the most slot receptions. If you check out my team right here that we have the nice red boxes around, we have 3 wide receivers, a running back, and a quarterback. So here's the thing. You might not have the same situation set up that we do. Maybe you didn't take a quarterback in round 3 and you went with a running back or receiver there instead. So you could have 4 receivers and a running back. You could have 3 receivers and 2 running backs. But here's the tip. You want at least 3 wide receivers with your first 5 picks as a general rule of thumb. Now, in round 6, consider taking a tight end or go for another receiver. And I call out tight end specifically because this is like the last spot where you can find a truly elite tight end. You have a Kyle Pitts here, a Dallas Goedert, guys who have produced in the past and really could even have another breakout season in store for some of these guys. If you wanted to go wide receiver instead, a Tyler Lockett, a Mike Evans, a Deontay Johnson, nice options, even a Christian Kirk here. Now, I personally went ahead in with the 63rd pick in round 6. I took Kyle Pitts, so I got my tight end here, which means I'm not going to have to draft one for a while or even another one at all if I don't want to. Now, so far, Kyle Pitts coming out of college was massively hyped up. He was a top 5 overall pick in the draft that year for fantasy. Everybody wanted him and loved him, and he's disappointed. But it's not because of himself. It's kind of the players around him, because he was number 1 last year amongst tight ends in earning targets. 34% of the time he ran a route, he earned a target. And any quarterback change will be an upgrade from Mariota, who was bottom 5 in most efficiency metrics last year. And as you can see here, this is Desmond Ridder, who in his final 2 years of college was one of the more accurate quarterbacks. Didn't throw a lot of interceptions, just 14 total in those 2 years, and was completing about 65 to 66% of his passes, above average. And then there's the fact that in 2 seasons, this guy only has 3 total touchdowns. He just has like a 5 or 6 touchdown season. He's going to beat his 6th round ADP pretty easily. Now, before we enter round 7, this is an important tip as we're in the middle rounds of drafts. In the middle rounds, if the same position is drafted 4+ times in a row, pivot to a different position. And here's an example of this in this draft that we're talking about. Right here, these are 4 wide receivers in a row: Adam Thielen, Van Jefferson, DJ Shark, and Zay Jones. You don't want to take another receiver after that because you just lost all the value. It got soaked up at that position in this round. So it's a good move here by this person to go ahead and get a quarterback, change the position there. Otherwise, you're getting the 5th best wide receiver based on value in that round alone. Now, in round 7, you want to draft a wide receiver. No other position but wide receiver. And there's a lot of solid options in this round. There's Hollywood Brown, Treylon Burks falls even more now with a guy like DeAndre Hopkins signing there. You have Kadarius Toney if you keep scrolling, so some solid options. Now, based on where I was drafting and the tiers that I was using, the best available wide receiver, and I actually like him, was Brandon Cooks, so I took him in round 7. Look, Cooks was massively inefficient last year, arguably the worst year of his career as he's aging. Just 1.77 yards per route run, was outside the top 40 wide receivers, like a 20% drop from his previous year. But it's not that fair to blame Cooks because for the first time in his career, he played in the least efficient offense in the NFL. The Texans were 32nd in overall offensive efficiency. But now Cooks gets to leave that situation and go to a borderline top 10 offensive efficiency team in Dallas with Dak Prescott, who when he was healthy last year was 12th in efficiency. So now we're in rounds 8 through 10, and this is important. Lean running backs over wide receivers in these rounds. Only 4 wide receivers have finished top 12 in these rounds since 2010. And you can see right here in these rounds of 8, 9, and 10, I take running backs. I follow this rule. I follow it pretty strictly. Alvin Kamara here in round 8, 9 is Damian Harris, and Khalil Herbert in 10. Again, don't do this for every single one of your drafts if some wide receivers fall or other positions, but this is a nice spot to target. I will point out that in round 9 is also a spot to be looking at Daniel Jones or Geno Smith, those mobile quarterbacks that we want if they're there. Now, it's worth talking about Alvin Kamara, who ended up just getting a settlement for his suspension. You can see Adam Levitan says that they were believing a 4-game suspension would come from the NFL. After this news, they're still putting out their 4 games, but some other sources are saying maybe it's no games now, maybe it's only 2 games for Kamara. There was uncertainty if he would get 6 to 8 games, and that's why he was falling all the way to like round 8. So right now is the time to take advantage and be drafting him, especially because one of his biggest competition pieces, a player that was just drafted this year by the Saints, and Kendre Miller, well, he's already starting the preseason on the non-football football injury list because his meniscus and ACL and MCL have not even healed yet, which is a major red flag. They were supposed to be by now. And for what it's worth, he has a quarterback upgrade in Derek Carr this year. And Derek Carr last year, well, he targeted Josh Jacobs 65 times, which is borderline top 10 in the NFL. And Kamara is a much better pass catching running back than Jacobs. So now we're through 10 rounds of the draft. We have 10 players, and here's a little bit of inventory to keep in mind. You want to have at least 4 wide receivers and 4 running backs through the first 10 rounds of your draft. Now, before we head into round 11 in the later rounds where you can find some of these league winners and deep values, I just want to ask, do you want to win your fantasy league, beat your friends, and take home a fantasy championship? Well, if so, the Fantasy Blueprint is for you. It'll have all the tools and analysis you need to win your league, like our top 255. You can see right here a player we talked about, Brandon Cooks. He's my 74th overall player. I'm 9 spots ahead of ADP on him. He's a good value. Now, getting the Fantasy Blueprint and joining the thousands of others who already have it is really simple. Just click the link in the description below or the QR code on the screen and follow the 2 simple steps. This is the best value in the entire industry. For just $5, you get it to help you with your draft in every single week until your fantasy playoffs and your overall championship. And if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I'll just refund that $5. This is risk-free. So grab your Fantasy Blueprint, and then as you head into round 11, target the best running back or wide receiver available. And there's a lot of good options in these rounds. You'll see an Elijah Mitchell, a Tyler Algier. These guys fit the mold of the later rounds. You want to prioritize younger players with upside in these middle to later rounds. Now, with my 11th pick, I took Elijah Mitchell, which means I just went for 4 running backs in a row for my personal picks, which is not the worst thing, but I actually got sniped here. This was my toughest pick of the draft. I wanted Jacoby Myers. He got taken just a pick before me. I wanted Rondale Moore and Juju. I thought, okay, I have 3 receivers queued up, and there's like 5 picks until all 3 of them went, and that was a little bit heartbreaking, but we still had Elijah Mitchell there to kind of get some nice value. And look, Mitchell is efficient. He was top 10 in the NFL, averaging 6 yards per touch last year, and in his 2 seasons in the NFL, he remains top 15 on a yards per touch basis, and now he's in this really good offense. He'll probably earn 8 to 10 touches a game even if McCaffrey's healthy, but if something happens to McCaffrey, well, Mitchell becomes a league winner. And there's not all that much competition behind him. It's just Jordan Mason and Tyrion Davis-Price, 2 guys that he beat out last year and significantly was seeing work over even when McCaffrey was healthy. Now, for the next 3 rounds, round 12 to 14, try and get a tight end if you didn't get one earlier. Otherwise, get the best available running back or receiver. So these next 3 picks are pretty easy. You can either get a tight end like a Tyler Higbee, a Dalton Kincaid. They're good options here in these rounds, but since I already have one, I'm just going to target the best available receiver or running back. And since I just went 4 running backs in a row, I definitely wanted to get a receiver in round 12, and it just so happened that my next 3 picks in these rounds were all receivers, so we ended up bolstering our receiver core with DJ Chark, Michael Gallup, and Jayden Reed. Now, I must point out, with the pick of Michael Gallup, I now have the 3 starting receivers for Dallas. I didn't want Gallup, but he dropped 30 spots, nearly 3 rounds in this draft. I actually had to start looking up, did something happen to Michael Gallup? Is he injured? Nothing that I could find as of this point, so I got him because he was a major value. Now, more specifically, my 12th round pick, DJ Chark, depending on the draft year, and he goes anywhere from the 13th to 15th round, so I reached on him a little because, look, I think he's the wide receiver 1 on his team. He's competing with Adam Thielen, 33 and a half years old. Terrace Marshall hasn't done anything the first 2 years, and a rookie in Jonathan Mingo. And just a year ago, Chark was really efficient. He was top 10 in yards per target and yards per reception, and he was actually 3rd at earning fantasy points against man coverage. And last year, he was a top 40 wide receiver when healthy, but now he goes outside the top 70 receivers in drafts. So now we enter round 15, and there's 2 things to do here. First, if Kyler Murray drops to round 15, just draft him. Whether you have a quarterback to this point or maybe you don't, hopefully you do by this point. There's been a couple spots to take them, but Kyler Murray, if he falls, draft him. Usually he won't fall to 15. Sometimes he does because of the injury, but otherwise, grab a depth wide receiver here. Depending on the drafter, and you might see Nico Collins or Rondale Moore drop all the way down to this point. More likely, you're going to see guys like Romeo Doubs. You can see some players popping up on the screen right now. A Jalen Hyatt, some players like this. Jonathan Mingo can fall to you. Now, personally, this is one of my favorite sneaky picks in the draft, and it's Devontae Parker, who doesn't get drafted in a lot of leagues. I took him with my 15th round pick to get even more depth because he might be the wide receiver 1 on his team. Look, it's most likely Juju Smith-Schuster based on just being a little younger in skill, but Devontae Parker just got a new 3-year deal worth up to $33 million from this team. And there's reports that Tyquan Thornton is still dealing with some injuries in camp right now, and the only other guy there to compete with is Juju, who's new to the offense. And Parker, just a year ago in this offense, was being targeted downfield often, which is one of the fantasy cheat codes. Downfield targets and red zone targets, he sees those too. He was 2nd in average target distance last year. Each one of his targets was averaging nearly 16 yards. And like we mentioned his competition earlier, Juju's new to the team. Kendrick Bourne was basically being benched most of the year last year. Tyquan dealing with some injuries. Outside of that, there's not not much here. Special teams depth in Matthew Slayton and Trey Nixon. Not a lot of competition for one Devontae Parker. So now we head to round 16. Maybe it's your last round of the draft. Maybe you have a couple more, but either way, in this round, target an upside running back. And the upside running backs to this point in the draft, you'll see guys like Chuba Hubbard. Some other options are like a Ty Chandler, a Tajay Spears, maybe even a Jerome Ford falls to you. Now, I personally went with a Chuba Hubbard here because I think he'll see touches even with Miles Sanders healthy. And if something happens to Sanders, as it's happened the last 3 years, well, then Hubbard's going to see some more work. And then this draft that I did was only 18 rounds. So for the final 2 picks, my 17th and 18th round pick, I got a backup quarterback in CJ Stroud and a backup tight end in Packers tight end Luke Musgrave. So right there, that's just rounding out the draft. Your final couple of rounds of the draft, just take the best available position for your depth spots. Now, here's the thing. You don't have to just use this strategy 1 time or 2 times on the leagues you play against your buddies, your friends, and coworkers, because you could draft basically as many times as you want on Underdog. They have a Best Ball Mania contest with $3 million to first place alone. And the beautiful thing about Best Ball is you just draft your team. There's no waiver wire. There's nothing like that. You just draft it and it automatically takes your highest scoring positions. You can do a 30-second draft or an 8-hour draft depending on what your schedule looks like. And they have, look at this, up to $15 million in prizes. So check out Underdog. It's linked down below or the QR code on the screen to get your free entry up to $100. So you put in 100, you get 100 right back to play with. Now, this has been the #1 draft strategy to smack around your buddies this year. Now, part of this strategy is finding some sleepers. And if you want to see 7 players that nobody wants, but you should draft in 2023, well, check out this video right here. Take 2 seconds to make sure you subscribe to this channel so you can see all the information you need to beat your friends this year.